Father God, we know that you speak to us through your word. Lord, you speak deep into our lives and our hearts. So I ask, prepare our hearts to hear what you have to say. Lord, help us to be open to the moving of your Spirit, of your word in our lives. I ask this in your name. Amen. So we've all heard the sermons on the Great Commission. You know, it's the marching orders for us as Christians, for the church. It tells us where we're to go, what we're to do, how we're to function. And as you probably know, there's the main action, or this imperative verb that's in verse 19 here. And that's make disciples. That's what we're supposed to do. And connected to that main action are three helping verbs. That's called participles, and that's how we're supposed to do it. We're supposed to be going, baptizing, and teaching. So if Jesus lived today, in modern terms, we would say that Jesus' vision was to see disciples being made, right? And his strategy were these other three things: going, baptizing, and teaching. We know that. That's why many of us are here. We've gone, we're baptizing, we're teaching, as we're making Christ's disciples. And that's the Great Commission. So this afternoon, rather than talk more about this part, I wanted to focus on two other portions in this passage, verses 18 and verses 20. And I want to call them the bookends on the Great Commission. Things that I'd say we absolutely need to understand, we need to know if we want to see Christ's vision of disciple-making realized. As humans, I think we naturally focus on what we can do. The middle part here, the going and baptizing and teaching. And sometimes we lose sight of these other things in the busyness of our ministries and our lives. So what are these bookends? So there's all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. All authority in heaven and earth. We know that the earth revolves around the sun, and the sun circles the center of our Milky Way galaxy. And then our galaxy is part of another group of galaxies, it's very similar to our own, that are called the local group. And then the local group of galaxies are part of a bigger cluster of the galaxies called the Virgo cluster. And it just keeps going. And then this Virgo cluster is joined by millions of other galaxy clusters like it that are strung together in the universe like this huge spider web. There's trillions and trillions of stars like our own. And we know that for by Christ all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Christ created the universe. We can't even begin to get our mind around that. And the trillions of stars that make up our universe, and by his word, he holds that all together. It's staggering to think about. We like to think of Jesus as our friend. He is. He is our friend. But Jesus is God. And he's really 100% God. And this is an awesome thing to think about. I think in many ways it's easy for us to acknowledge this in our minds. Yes, we know Christ is God. He defeated Satan on the cross. He defeated death in his resurrection. Yes, he's the all-supreme being in this universe. And we know this in our minds. But this verse that we are looking at talks about authority, about his lordship. Christ is Lord of this universe, Lord over the spiritual realm, over these principles and powers and authorities. But is Christ Lord of us, of our hearts? Because you see, the Great Commission begins with Christ's authority and Christ's lordship in our own hearts. And we could only see Christ's vision fulfilled through us as we truly make him Lord. You might say, hey, you're preaching to the choir. I mean, we all are missionaries. Of course, well, not all of us are missionaries, but we're all living the life that God's called us to. We've all made him Lord of our lives. We pray and we seek God and we include God in our plans. That's great. But as you've probably heard, God doesn't want to be included in our plans, in your plan and mine. He wants us to be part of his plan, right? And there's all the difference in the world. We recently we just prayed for the Cambodian government. The Cambodian government has a form of government called a constitutional monarchy. And so does Thailand and the UK and the Netherlands and many other countries in this world. And what it means that it's a constitutional monarchy is that you have a king or a queen who's the head of state, but the ability to make and pass legislation resides with an elected parliament, right? And that parliament is headed by the prime minister. So you have the king and queen, but the laws are made by members of parliament, and parliament falls under the control of the prime minister. So I've heard in such countries that after new law is drafted, there's space at the bottom of the page for the king or the queen's signature. And sometimes signing a new law is done with a lot of great show, right? The king or queen gets all dressed up and they sit in their throne and they have a big pen and lots of fancy stamps. And then they sign the law and people take all these pictures. And then it becomes law. But in reality, and this is the important part, in reality, even if the king or the queen doesn't sign the law, it's still the law. It doesn't need his or her signature because the king or the queen doesn't govern the nation. It's Parliament that governs the nation. And I'm afraid oftentimes we view the lordship of Christ in our lives like a constitutional monarchy. Christ is the king, yes, and we afford him a lot of respect in our lives. We give him honor. He sits on this fancy throne in our minds. We end our prayers in his name. And we make our plans. We make our plans and leave that line for God at the bottom. And we say, okay, God, it's your turn to sign it now. We may see him as king, but we're really acting as his prime minister. We've already passed the laws that govern our own lives, and we're just respectfully asking for his signature at the bottom. How many times have we done that? We figure out what we want, we write it all down, and we respectfully, solemnly ask God to sign it. And I'm sorry, but that's not lordship. We do it all the time. And I'd say it's really idolatry, because what we're doing is we're setting up God in his rightful place. So how do we give the authority to Christ over our lives that he deserves? Instead of drawing up our plans with a line at the bottom for God to sign, Christ asks us to sign his plans first. But his plans are a blank page, and he just puts that line there, and he says, sign it. We say, but God, there's nothing there. But God says, sign it. And he can put anything there, anytime, anywhere that he wants on there. And it may not be what we want. It might not be what we think is best. But in doing this, it demonstrates that he's God and we're not. He makes the decisions. He doesn't just follow our suggestions. See, the starting point of missions doesn't begin with going. It begins with lordship, his absolute lordship in each of our lives. Now, some might be thinking, this sounds all too heavy, too authoritative. But remember, Christ's lordship doesn't occur in a vacuum. It's in the context that he made us. He knows us. He loves us. And it's not just a little bit of love, but Christ's love is extravagant, over the top, a running over, down the sides type of love. Love that took him all the way to the cross for each of us. And his plans for us are far, far more gracious, far more right than our small, flawed plans for ourselves. So accepting his authority is just giving him that place in our lives that he created for himself when he first made us. So it's not a heavy thing to do. It's really a coming home. It's really trusting that he made us, he's the maker, and he knows what's best for us. Another way that we could look at what Christ's lordship means to us is by looking at the words that Christ used here. So we spoke already of Christ's power creating the universe, of Jesus being raised from the dead, of God doing more than we could ask or imagine. And in each of those cases, the Greek word for that is dunamis. And that's where we get the word dynamite. Christ has that kind of pure power, that dynamite type of power. But all of you, and I think it's almost everybody in this room, who have hurtled down a bumpy road going in a bus far faster than you think is ever safe, you know that power by itself is very scary. It could get you in a lot of trouble. So the word that Jesus used to describe his lordship here in verse 19 isn't dunamis, it's exousia. And exousia is best described as power in legitimate hands. So let me tell you a little story about this to help explain it. When I was in grad school, I went to a church where there were a lot of players from an American football league called the Cincinnati Bengals. A lot of them worshiped there. And there was this one guy, Anthony Munoz. He was a huge guy. You could see him in church all the time because he's so tall. So here's Anthony Munoz when he was 12. Here's Anthony. Here's his coach. And here's the other 12-year-old kids around him. And he kept growing. So here's Anthony Munoz with some rather big, normal-sized people, I should say. He's just one of those guys. He stands in the doorway and he just fills the entire doorway up. He is dunamis. But this is exousia. Anthony can knock you down, but the ref can throw Anthony out of the game. That's the difference. Christ exercises his power, his exousia, for our good. He's not just shooting around power like this, irresponsibly in the universe, but he's acting on our behalf for our growth, for our faith, for our ultimate joy and satisfaction in him. You can trust his exousia. You can place your life in his good and loving hands because he loves us, because he knows us. So this first section, verse 19, challenges us. Does Christ have all authority in our life? Is he the Lord of our lives? It's been called the great affirmation, Christ's authority over all. So let me pause here and let your hearts respond to this. Is Christ the constitutional monarch of your life? Esteemed and honored, highly respected, but not governing? Or is he Lord? Are you willing to sign his blank page for your life? Are you willing to trust in his love, that his plans are better than the ones that you have for yourself? As we pause, I want you to think, is there something that God might put on that sheet, on that page, that you just couldn't sign? If there is, you can trust God more. You can trust in his love more. Lord, you want me to take that role that I really don't like? Christ says, my child, just trust me. But Lord, you want who to be my next field leader? My child, trust me. Lord, you want me to change my ministry again after so many changes? My child, trust me. Lord, you want me to miss seeing my kids and my grandkids grow up? My child, trust me. Lord, you want me to go home? My child, trust me. He wants us to know that he loves us. He wants us to trust him. So let's just pause for a moment and to think and reflect and pray. So the third section, after the Great Commission, is the second bookend. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. And that's been called the Great Promise. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. David Livingstone was a Scottish missionary in the 1800s. He was a missionary to Africa, and he pioneered medical missions in that continent, when at that time it was far tougher than we have it now. He returned on furlough to Glasgow University after being in Africa for 16 years and met with a student group there. And as he sat down in front of those students, it was clear the price that he paid for his service in Africa. By that time, he had tropical fever more than 27 times. It had left him looking old and thin and frail. One of his arms hung useless by his side because that was the result of being mauled by a lion. And his message to the students was this. He said, "Shall I tell you what sustained me amidst that toil, the hardship, and loneliness of my exile? It was Christ's promise. Lo, I am with you always, even unto the end." That was Christ's promise. It was his promise to his disciples 2,000 years ago. And it's, as his disciples, it's his promise to us as well. So let's put that in perspective. We just established that Jesus is the supreme ruler over all creation, over a vast universe that we have no ability to fully explore or understand. All things are under his authority. Everything is in his control. And because of his mighty power, we're able to do more. He's able to do more than we could ever ask or imagine. That realization was what kept David Livingstone going in the jungles of Africa through the hardships, through the loneliness that would overwhelm most of us. And that's what should put an incredible sense of awe in each of our steps every day. God is with us. God is living in us. It's interesting that Jesus, where he says, "Surely I am with you always," he uses a word construction that emphasizes this personal pronoun I. So if you translated it literally, he actually says, "Surely I am with you always." It's not some unknown guy that's going to be with you always, or a lesser deity, or a random guardian angel that God assigns to us. No, Jesus says, "I am with you always. I, who have been walking with you in the flesh all these years, I who have just triumphed over death, I who love you selfishly. He's the one who'll be with them always. This man, God, with all authority and unlimited power, who calls us his friend, his brother. Jesus who walks beside us, who speaks to us, who encourages us, who lifts our head. An all-powerful God who knows not just our names, but the gifts that he's given us, our abilities, our hopes, our dreams, our weaknesses, our failures. He says, it is I who am with you always. So I is God, and always is always. Do you live like God is with you always? Has that promise really sunk down and transformed you? There's a series of popular pictures among doctors that show Christ going through a day with us. And to be honest, it's hard to have a normal day if God, the God who made the universe, is with us, isn't it? I mean, if Barack Obama, and Barack Obama isn't God, if Barack Obama was with me for even a day, not to say a lifetime, surely things are going to be different. I think my thoughts would be completely wrapped up in that experience for that day. You know, my attitudes would be different. I'd be surprised by the novelty of this all, enjoy the excitement, amazed at what his position brings. I mean, just imagine what that would be like. I know all of you aren't Barack Obama fans, but just imagine somebody else who has that same position in this world. So Barack Obama could change my life for a day if I was with him. But who is with me every day on that dusty road, walking through Cambodia, you know, through the meetings that we have, through every struggle, every challenge that I face? Who goes with us into our workplace and ministry, whose power and position can bring about things beyond our imagination, far more than just a president of the United States? I mean, Jesus is God. It's Jesus, the creator of the universe, the one with all authority and power, the lover of our souls. So just take a little time to think about what your day would be like if Jesus, the miracle maker, joined you in person. How does this promise make a difference to you? So let's pause. Now, I do want to end by saying that this great affirmation, great commission, and great promise was meant by Christ to encourage us. We shouldn't be feeling like we're falling short. Remember that we're saved by grace, not work. And it's not our obedience that saves us. It's Christ's obedience that saves us. Christ desires to pour out his love on us. That's what this is about. He desires that we have fruitful, abundant lives, watered by the truth of who he is and who we are as a result. So I want you to leave with the same feeling that the disciples had: awe. In Acts 1, it just describes the disciples gazing into heaven, I'm sure with their mouths open and just, what just happened? They weren't ashamed. They weren't kicking themselves and saying how they messed up or that they weren't doing enough for God or thinking about what they had to do that day. Their focus wasn't on themselves at all. It was on Jesus. They were absolutely awed. Jesus was God, and Jesus had a plan for their lives, and Jesus wanted to use them to make disciples throughout the world. Jesus promised to be personally with them always. They'd always have him, so they'd always have more, much more than enough. So the great affirmation is that Jesus is Lord of all, including my own heart. The Great Commission is make disciples in all the world by going, baptizing, and teaching. And we could only do that if we make Christ Lord first. And the great promise, Jesus himself is with us always. So we'll always have enough. We'll never be lacking. Life is an adventure with the King of the universe at our side. So I hope you'll start each day with that realization, with the awe and excitement that brings, and that you take that joy into your week as you make disciples of all nations. Let me have the worship team come up, and we'll sing that song again, What a Friend We Have in Jesus.